Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole, 4th District of Oklahoma, and this is another one of our congressional chats. Congress has actually been surprisingly effective this week again. Number one, it did something controversial, but I think something was politically necessary. That is, it made sure that our Border Patrol and the so-called ICE, which is Internal Customs Enforcement, got fully funded. We did it in an unusual way because Democrats in the Senate have repeatedly blocked the funding of both those agencies. They've done it because, frankly, they'd like to return to open borders, and they see ICE as somehow authoritarian when its main job is just to locate people that are here illegally, focusing particularly on people that commit crimes and sending them back to where they belong. That's a legitimate function. About 40% that are in the country illegally have arrived legally. That is, they come into the country on a visa and then they overstay their visa. So you've got to have some way to enforce them. And while the majority of those people, quite frankly, are here looking for opportunity because the United States is just simply a much better place to live, there's certainly a considerable number of drug dealers, criminals, people that are here with no good intent, and we have to have a mechanism to get them located and gone. That's what ICE does. Border Patrol has been fantastically successful under this president. If you remember, under President Biden, we literally had thousands of people a day coming into the country illegally. Changing presidents and changing policy, President Trump, we have now gone over 10 months, almost a year, with no known illegal entry into the United States. Why would you want to cut the funding of an agency that's doing that or not fully fund them? So a proposal was put together to fund the Border Patrol and fund the Internal Customs Enforcement for the next 3 years. Now, I will tell you personally, I don't like funding anything for 3 years. That's too much power and not enough oversight. But the Democrats have turned those into a political football. So we were able to make sure for the rest of the Trump presidency they'll be funded. This was necessary in part because the United States Senate has something called the filibuster. We have a majority of people in both the House and the Senate that want to fully fund both these agencies and voted to do so repeatedly. But the Senate has an artificial rule that requires you to get to 60. There's only 53 Republicans, and that means they have to have Democrats, and Democrats have used that power to disrupt the normal funding of governments. Of course, the two longest shutdowns in American history have happened in the last 6 months. The longest full government shutdown and the longest partial government shutdown, both of them engineered by Senate Democrats who refused, most of whom refused, to vote for just adequate funding or stable funding for important functions like that. So, the Senate able to use a very unique tool called reconciliation. You can only use it once a fiscal year, and pass that legislation with Republicans and I think two Democrats, certainly John Fetterman from Pennsylvania being the most notable one. And then it came over to the House. Again, it was a party line vote, and we made sure that those parts of government are going to be funded for the next 3 years. So not the best way to do things, but better than a shutdown of our border control and our shutdown of our internal control for people that are here illegally. More exciting for me is the Appropriations Committee actually passed 2 more bills out of committee. That means they're ready for consideration on the floor. One of them is Homeland Security itself, which includes ICE and Border Patrol, but also the Coast Guard, FEMA, FTA, the guys that, when you're getting on an airplane, make sure nobody's getting on with a bomb. FEMA obviously looks after you in an emergency situation, tornado damage, hurricane, those kind of things. So again, Coast Guard is the Coast Guard. Secret Service, all those things are now fully funded. They're funded in, number one, in the legislation we passed for 3 years. We also passed the entire departments as well. So that was a good thing. And then in addition to Homeland, we passed labor, health, and education at various agencies. That's the largest domestic spending bill. So we've got those ready to bargain. We've passed 11 of the 12 bills that normally fund the government out of the Appropriations Committee. We'll get the other big one and the last remaining one when we come back. That's defense. And my committee will be done with its work. Now, the whole of Congress still has a lot more work to do because only 2 of those bills we've passed have been passed by the House of Representatives. The Senate has so far been unable to pass a single appropriations bill, partly because the Democrats are misusing, again, that 60-vote requirement, and they're blowing up the appropriations process. They'll do anything they can to undermine President Trump. And if that involves putting federal workers at risk or out of work, they're willing to do that, as we've seen. They've done it twice in the last 6 months. So we're going to keep working our part and trying to get things done. And then in addition to passing those bills out of committee, defense, which is enormously important in our district. Tinker Air Force Base, the largest single site employer in the state. Fort Sill Army Post is the second largest. Both of those are in the 4th District of Oklahoma. The National Weather Service, all these various agencies, enormously important. A lot of them have connections to defense in particular. So again, getting that one done, enormously important to the country, but enormously important to our district. And we did get the defense bill done at the subcommittee level, literally today. This is Thursday. So that tees it up to go before the full committee, and we'll keep working trying to get the funding done. So again, very, very productive week in the United States Congress, particularly on the Appropriations Committee in the House. The sad thing is, again, the Senate Appropriations Committee is not able to function very well right now, not because of anything the Republicans are doing, but because Democrats just simply want to make life as miserable for President Trump as they can, and in doing so, they're willing to jeopardize the normal functioning of the federal government. But we're going to, again, try to work through that, try to come to a deal later this year, make sure that we don't have any more closures, and at least my committee is doing what it's supposed to do in that regard and setting us up to hopefully reach a final deal, both with the United States Senate and frankly, working in good faith with some of the Democrats that are willing to try and get something done for the good of the country. So that's, again, it. I think my biggest concern of the week was the failure to pass what's called FISA, the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act. This is something that allows the government, if it goes to court and gets the warrants to listen in on telephone calls, not inside the United States, but between people outside calling into the United States. That's a source of enormous intelligence for us, and it's something that's helped us avoid another 9/11. Can it be abused? Yes, it has been abused by some people. We put in a lot of reforms last year that seems to have made the difference. But once again, most Democrats refuse to support it, and frankly, some Republicans who are still concerned about individual liberty. That's a legitimate concern, wanting to protect people, but we live in a very dangerous world, and anybody thinks that terrorists aren't trying to figure out how to pull off a 9/11, they're simply wrong. One of the people, honestly, that was arrested for trying to kill President Trump, assassinate President Trump, was an individual who the Iranian government was literally trying to hire to kill the president. We've had 3 real assassination attempts aimed at this president, plus this 4th one where we identified the Iranians trying to co-opt somebody. So again, disrupting the normal things and disrupting things like FISA, the Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act, puts Americans at risk. We put in a lot of reforms, a lot of safeguards that should be sufficient to pass it, but unfortunately it wasn't, and we wanted the risk of that very important element in our intelligence going dark, us not being able to track So that was a big failure in Congress this week. But fortunately, I'm proud to say our delegation was very supportive on all these fronts, but particularly supportive of trying to make sure we continue to receive intelligence. With that, I look forward to next week. I'm actually in the district. Congress is not in session that week, and so I look forward to talking to you about Congress in a couple of weeks. We may or may not do something next week as we're traveling around the district. We'll make that decision then. But in the meantime, again, surprisingly good week, certainly on the Appropriations Committee. We're moving the bills we need to move. We're funding the government. There's a lot of good things in the legislation for Oklahoma. Certainly for our military bases, we're able to fund the missions that we have, certainly for things like the National Weather Service or the Kerr Water Labs and ADA. The basic funding is at least through the committee, and frankly, we fared very well. So with that, I hope you and your family are doing well. I look forward to visiting with you again soon. Good luck. God bless.